let us move on to an article that appeared recently in the Jerusalem Post. It's purely by chance that I saw it, because the Jerusalem Post over decades has become such a rag that I never see it or look at it, but somehow this came to my attention. The article here, which I'm going to share on the screen for just one moment, written by someone called Hanan Steinhardt. I do not know exactly who this person is. The headline speaks more or less for itself. Hamas to remain in power, Netanyahu's hidden motive unveiled. The author suggests that Netanyahu's long-term war strategy is to degrade the Hamas, but to leave it standing and in control of the Gaza Strip, because from his perspective, any other option is worse. In other words, that would bring all kinds of pressures to bear on Israel to create a so-called fake Palestinian state, etc., etc. Starting in Gaza, then moving so-called what our enemies refer to as the West Bank, that is to say, Yehuda and Shomron, and therefore the best solution, and that's also why Netanyahu has not suggested that Israel take over the Gaza Strip, conquer it militarily, and then install a civil administration or something like that. That is this person's thesis. What do you make of that?
In a word, he's delusional and suffers from BB derangement syndrome. Now, having said that, let me address this piece in detail.
In other words, what you mean to say is that you think he's another BB deranged leftist, and that's why he's making this claim.
Correct.
All right.
Factually, there are two things that we have to keep in mind, and they both relate to BB. His opinion was that if Hamas were in power in Gaza, they would serve as a balancing agent to the Palestinian Authority, that they would basically be in conflict with one another and prevent the creation of a unified, quote unquote, Palestinian state. Okay. What that led to was BB's misguided notion that with enough money, basically from Qatar, that there would be a civil society that would be created in Gaza, that could build up enough resources, if you will, opportunities, what have you, that they wouldn't want to lose. And that Hamas, and I was told this directly right before the war, Hamas are basically businessmen. They're businessmen. I was told this.
Yes, businessmen who print in huge numbers and distribute in their UN UNRWA-run schools Arabic translations of Mein Kampf.
Mein Kampf,
with
exactly.
Hitler on the front cover in nice, very vivid colors for the 5, 6, and 7-year-olds to begin reading.
This policy of BB's was known by enough people over time to be a total failure. Now, no less a person than Yossi Cohen, the former head of the Mossad, came out with a very interesting interview, also in the Jerusalem Post, in which he relates how he was basically tasked as the bag man by BB to go to Qatar to arrange the money transfers to Hamas. And a little late in the day, but, like many people who now recognize that the Hitnathut that resulted in the destruction of the Gush Katif and the 4 settlements in the northern Shomron was a mistake, and they knew it at the time, but they couldn't do anything about it. Now Yossi Cohen comes along and says, well, I kind of thought this was a misguided policy by BB and it would not work, but I'm a team player, basically. I'm a team player, and I went along with it.
You omitted to mention at the time.
Yeah. Okay. So now, if there were any if there were any evidence that Bibi, in the wake of October 7th, wanted to permit Hamas to exist at any time in the future, he would be committing political suicide. And he understands this as well. The problem is his inability to act on that realization because of people like Gantz and Eisenkot and Gallant and people in the United States and Europe and the UN. There are a host of countries that are kind of interfering with his new realization that he cannot allow Hamas to exist the day after. But the problem for him is the fact that whatever he plans to do, whatever military options or political options he chooses to act upon to ensure that Hamas does not exist the day after, is doomed to failure. Why? And he, by the way, knows this. Well, I know this because I've talked to several advisors of his who are breaking their heads trying to convince him of this. Why? Because the overwhelming number of Gazans still support Hamas. No matter what happened around them. It's over 85% by last reckoning. So he knows that if we don't do what I've advocated, and many others have, which is to get rid of the guys, he's going to be left with a legacy of Hamas winning. It doesn't matter if we reduce Rafah right now. It's just like the Germans that elected Hitler. We had to bomb the daylights out of them in order to finally defeat them. Well, we're not doing that in Gaza. We aren't. I mean, we are, a woke, progressive, liberal defense army, right? So we knock on the roof and say, get out of the building because we're going to take it down. We do all kinds of stupid things like that make us feel warm and fuzzy, but are not appropriate to the kind of war we're facing right now. So Bibi knows that unless we do this radical operation of basically depopulating Gaza and annexing it, he will be faced the day after with Hamas demonstrations everywhere, which is why, nobody wants to go in there as a security force. None of the other Arab countries, certainly no European country, certainly not the United States, wants to set foot in that hellhole because they know the overwhelming number of people will be protesting every day for Hamas. So the bottom line on this is, yes, this guy in the Jerusalem Post can write this drivel, this Bibi derangement syndrome. But Bibi is trapped because on the one hand, he knows that his whole strategy of, it's kind of like his Osloitis strategy of giving the Gazans something to lose so they'll be nice and not attack us, failed. And yet, on the other hand, the day after, if there are demonstrations in favor of Hamas coming back and being reelected to lead the Gazans as their duly elected representatives, then the Bibi derangement syndrome will stick, but for a different reason. I mean, he's aware of his past mistakes, but he just doesn't understand how to prevent his past failures from being repackaged and used against him the day after. He can't make that step, that mental step to do what is necessary to correct his past mistakes. And I'm sorry, the one impediment to him doing that is this whole notion that the Arabs in Gaza,
let's call them
fake.
what they are, the Fakestinians. Someone
fake
recommended.
yeah.
Someone you should know. I'll mention here for the viewers as well to hear this. Someone actually wrote to me some time ago and suggested that we use that, and I recommend to you, Jonathan, and that's what I'm doing right now, that we use the term Fakestinians because they're a fake non-existent nation invented by our enemies, and it seems a reasonable
be
option.
used as a weapon against us.
Exactly. So it's a reasonable option. So
I like it.
Let's go with Fakestinians.
Fakestinians. Okay. So, as I said, this author may be seen in due time as being correct, but for the wrong reasons. Bibi just can't take the necessary steps to ensure that Hamas is completely eradicated. Look, when somebody, chas v'shalom, God forbid, has cancer, and the surgeons are prepared to operate and excise the tumor or tumors, the issue is always how much do we take out of the person? And they always err on the side of caution by taking more generally than they should. Well, in this case, the analogy is with the Fakestinians, who are the object of the world's attention right now in terms of their culinary requirements, their nutritional requirements, and their living requirements. And unfortunately, in this case, if he were a surgeon, he would have to say, I have to cut a lot out to save the patient, and the patient is Israel. So, unfortunately, I don't see him doing this. So this charge of him supporting Hamas will stick, but for the wrong reason.
What do you think in that case is Netanyahu's plan for the day after, if there is a day after?
If there is, let's assume there is a day after. From what we understand now, there was a leak from the Prime Minister's office of his plan. And in a word, it was delusional. But upon closer inspection, it was clearly intended to protect him, if you will, from the charges of the ICC of genocide, the arrest warrants, the indictment, whatever. That he really has a very progressive and very humane plan for the day after. What does this include? Well, they even were nice enough to show some pictures of this future Gaza. And Bibi ostensibly wants to turn it into the Singapore of the Middle East.
I seem to recall such an idea being floated in the past.
Yeah, and he's just repackaged it. He understands that Arak Sharon, who was facing some pretty serious charges by the High Court here, decided to do something really crazy. The Hitnathut, by ripping the Jews.
By destroying all the Jewish residences in
Gaza
Ashdod,
and in the northern Shomron.
Destroying everything and expelling all the Jews, yes.
Right, and it worked for him. There were no charges brought against
him. Even though in his case the charges were real, factual.
Oh, they were very real.
Nothing like the false charges being brought against.
No, they were very substantial, justified, credible charges.
He was corrupt. He was corrupt.
Okay, he was corrupt as the day is long. Okay. But between us, if he were corrupt like Mayor Daley, the father Daley in Chicago, at least things ran well. Okay, at least they ran well. No, so what happens with Bibi is he's come up with this delusion of the day after, in which, amongst other things, Gaza will become the new center of electric vehicle production, rivaling that of China. It took me a while to get my equilibrium back.
For laughing. It's amusing. It's very amusing.
Yeah, I mean, I had to stop laughing, and I took it personally. Why? Because 4 years ago, when I came here, I had an idea of trying to start an electric vehicle manufacturing center. And I was told by everybody, from the president at the time, Bougie Herzog, to Nir Barkat, to others, that I was delusional, that Israel doesn't manufacture things like that. We just make gadgets. Okay, the fact of the matter is, I've gone around to the various hotels around here and talked to many of the southern evacuees and asked them. I showed them the article. I asked them for their reaction. Honestly, they were stunned and almost into silence. One woman looked at me with tears in her eyes and said, this is what their reward will be for murdering my husband and taking my son who knows where. I don't know where he is. This is what they get for that? A Singapore of the Mediterranean? She said, my home is still ashes. Nobody's come forward from the government to help me. Nobody has even said anything. But I'm being forced to go back, by the way, because they're cutting my money off. And she said, I have to go back to cinders, and they're offering these animals, these monsters, a Singapore? She said, who came up with it? I showed her. It was Bibi's plan for the day after. And she just walked away from me. And other people came up. I mean, I went on to all the hotels about this, showing them about this. And you could see the bile just rising in these people, the fury at what this inadequate prime minister was promoting in an attempt clearly to protect himself from indictment or an arrest warrant or whatever. Maybe his controllers in the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab and the Davos crowd were the ones that put him up to this. I don't know. But no man, clear-thinking man could possibly come up with such a harebrained and deeply offensive suggestion for the day after. So, yes, we know what his plans are. And they include, a security force of the willing, so to speak. The Abraham Accord countries, basically contributing troops, right, to a cesspool just brimming over with Hamasnikim. Yeah, I'm sure that these countries really want to put their soldiers in harm's way like that. They don't want to own that. So honestly, the bottom line is he doesn't have an idea at all. And this is what happens when you have a man that knows the price of everything and the value of nothing. This man has no fear of heaven. He is not religious. He has no understanding of who we're fighting and how we should fight them. He's just trying desperately to maintain his position as prime minister, not so much for anything he could do right now or in the immediate future, but because of legacy with a capital L, legacy. Well, we see where this is heading right now. And this plan that he has for the day after, once I stopped laughing and I suddenly realized that this was something maybe fairly serious, was deeply insulting to all the people who died, raped, dismembered, burned, babies burned in ovens. This was not done entirely by the Nukhba forces, the elite forces of Hamas, so to speak, that came across and wreaked this vengeance on us. No, a lot of it was done by the citizens, the good citizens of Gaza. Okay, and you're going to give, as this woman says, they killed my husband, they burned my house down, my son, I don't know where he is, and they're going to give them, in return for doing that to me, they're going to give them gleaming skyscrapers and an EV, an electric vehicle industry to rival that of China.
I will tell you,
I
none of that will ever come to pass.
I actually woke Rivka, I woke my wife up and I showed her the article. And she just looked at me and she said, "It's not Purim, Jonathan." Her answer basically meant Purim spiel. This is just And she went back to bed. So, yeah, that's the day after. Purim spiel.
Let me tell you, Jonathan, why none of that will come to pass. First of all, I would like to ask you and anyone who's listening to us, when was the last time you bought any manufactured product of any type from Syria, Libya, Egypt, Yemen, for that matter, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Lebanon? The list, I could go on. The point is, none of these countries, none of those populations are able to produce anything that any normal person on the planet wishes to purchase. If it wasn't for the fact that, for reasons beyond my ken, Hashem
Oil,
chose to place huge oil reserves beneath the feet of the
Ishmaelites.
Ishmaelim in places like Saudi Arabia, for which reason, and the Arab Emirates, etc., for which reason they are immensely wealthy. That has nothing to do with their talents or their abilities. They can produce nothing that anyone wishes to purchase. And if they happen to have oil, then there too they also need foreigners to develop the oil fields and what have you. To suggest that you could turn Gaza, the Gaza Strip, into a Singapore with gleaming skyscrapers and an
It's madness.
EV industry is pure insanity. On top of that, I will mention here, for the record, that I believe that EVs are a scam and unworkable. And this is not just my opinion. And Toyota is of the same opinion. Toyota refuses to switch to an EV manufacturing business model. It's impossible. It's impossible to pull off, even in terms of raw materials like lithium.
I've come full circle on this whole issue of EVs. I mean, while you raised the subject, and now I'm a very firm believer in hybrids. That if you are going to have
that's a different story. That's a different story. There I agree with you. There I agree with you.
You have to have a hybrid vehicle that can use a multi-fuel, whether it's ethanol or butanol or whatever else you have. You have to have a secure energy source on the vehicle that doesn't require a power station, because, well, power stations may be destroyed. They may disappear. So you have to have some way of powering the car. And the only way I've seen that after years of looking at this problem is that EVs are not the way to go, that hybrids, a multi-fuel or polyfuel hybrid that can use a multitude of fuels is the only way you can go forward safely. But, again, when you talk about people like Bibi and others around him, and I had to confront them about this issue 4 years ago, they're very good with catchphrases, that capture people's imagination. And so you're right. This whole issue of EVs, look, is ridiculous. The Saudis, the Egyptians, the UAE, Turkey, yes, they all have EV projects, not homegrown. They're basically assembling cars for their local market with a lot of outside consultants, foreign consultants, who will build the factory for them, who will manage the factory for them, who will guarantee a supply chain for them, et cetera, et cetera. There's nothing homegrown, nothing about this technology, this high-tech automotive technology in the Middle East at all. We, believe it or not, have a leg up in this matter, because we have Mobileye, we have store-dot batteries, we have a lot of the constituent elements of an EV, if that's the way you want to go. And I presented this, on a big board, and nobody cared. You could take all those things that I just mentioned and many more and turn out a fine hybrid vehicle that the fuel we could create here synthetically, the batteries, we don't need lithium for that. There are other materials that we could use for that. We could do it. But for Bibi to just, this is what he does. He just uses catchphrases, and that Gaza is going to be the new Detroit, if you will, of the EV industry. Wow. Whatever he's smoking, I wish it was legalized so I could have a couple
I'll
of kilos.
I'll tell you what, Jonathan, when I see people in the West willing to purchase cars manufactured in Morocco or Lebanon or Iraq or
with a self-destruct button,
or Saudi Arabia or any, you name it, or even in Iran. When you tell me, you show me where all those consumers are that are willing to purchase such products, then we can discuss an EV revolution in Gaza, in the Gaza Strip. That is not even pie in the sky. It is too ludicrous to contemplate.
But that's what he went out with.
Because he's involved now in self-preservation.
Correct.
And nothing else. And as you said, legacy. But no matter what he does, Benjamin Netanyahu's legacy will be ashes, rubble, and disgrace.
Black Sabbath.
And disgrace.
Black Sabbath. Correct.
Disgrace and infamy. That will be his final legacy.
Quite right.
Because he is, at bottom, a secular liberal, Hebrew-speaking Westerner.
I call people like that Hebrew-speaking Philistines.
And that is not the kind of person who can lead the Jewish nation.
At all.
We need a leader who has the intellect, the courage, and the vision, all rooted in our eternal connection and covenant with Hashem and the Torah to lead this nation forward. And he has never been the right person for that.
Ever.
The question is, how did Netanyahu ever manage to convince so many people that he was Mr. Security and the ideal leader who would lead us to the promised land? How did he do that?
There are two ways of doing that. It's convincing people that the notion of quiet for quiet actually works. And we all know now that, yes, we were quiet, but the enemy was building up during that period of quiescence. The other way of doing it is to latch on to the realization that many people hope and pray for a good leader to protect us. And he knew how to package what people wanted to hear without implementing any of it. I had a conversation with him once, Rob, in which he said, you're the type of guy that we let out of the cage every once in a while to take care of these intractable problems we're suffering from today. My answer to him was, first of all, I'm not an animal to be let out of and then put back into a cage. And second of all these intractable problems that you say we're suffering from right now are your responsibility. They all happened on your watch. He thought that was funny.
And they're not entirely, not exclusively, but of his making. But even where he did not create the problem, he did nothing to undo the problem, to correct, to change course
at all. And so he's a very gifted orator. There's no question about it. But there's a trick to seizing and repackaging people's hopes and aspirations and more or less assimilating those hopes and aspirations into your statements. Not that they result in any actions being taken, just the illusion of actions being taken.
He has always been a salesman of illusions.
He started off as a salesman in Chutz La'aretz.
Precisely. You got my drift. That's exactly
it. And
that's what we're dealing with. We're dealing with a salesman.
Correct. That's it. I call him, I don't know if you're familiar with this commercial, but there's a character I always thought was great in the United States called Joe Isuzu. And he was a figure where, it was a commercial for Isuzu cars. And he was just a notorious liar. And his lies were just so horrible that, you had to laugh at it rather than take him seriously. Unfortunately, Bibi Isuzu succeeded in selling a lot of snake oil to people who actually believed him, wanted to believe him. And we have this now with this group called the Bibistas, the ones that there's
Bibistim in Hebrew.
Bibistim, yeah.
The
Known,
Netanyahu who idolize
correct,
him. Yeah.
correct. And there's nothing you can say to them. There's nothing you can say to them that will change their, just their belief that he's the next best thing to sliced bread. I mean, it's just, you can't talk to them at all.
He's much too photogenic, but he's an empty suit.
Completely.
The question is,
it came to roost on October 7th.
Exactly, precisely so. For many years, he managed to push things off and claim that, look how good my record is. The security has never been better. And then the worst possible disaster in our history took place on his watch.
Correct. And he should have retired years before.
Of course.
And blamed it on somebody else.